Here's where historians are now. Historians are quite a bit different. You've already seen the Gateway Archive and Beyer, where historians historians clearly value each of those three functions more than the aggregate does, and also value teaching support and research support more. So what that is to say is that historians value essentially every function of the library that we've described here more than the average faculty member does. And I think that's a really interesting political issue, funding issue for libraries in trying to understand who they serve and how they serve them, and correspondingly for historians and for others who would be similarly high in terms of their valuation of these kinds of functions, important to recognize that the libraries may be serving their needs better than it is certain other constituencies on campus. So here we get a little bit dicier. We wanted to really confront faculty members with what does all of this actually mean? And so we sometimes in this survey instrument we give these strongly worded statements to gauge levels of agreement with the statement. And this is an example of one of those strongly worded statements. Because faculty have easy access to academic content online, the role that librarians play at this institution is becoming much less important. And then we gauge on a scale of 1 to 10, do you agree strongly or not with that? And then we'll also do some dependency slides as well. So here you see, from right to left, you see the sciences, social sciences, humanities, and then as a subset of humanities, historians. And so you can see that this is the share of people giving an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 in their level of agreement with this statement. You can see that in 2006, essentially no one agreed strongly with this statement, and literally 0.0% of historians agreed strongly with this statement. But it's still not anywhere close to a majority or anything like that of faculty members that agree that the role of librarians is becoming much less important. But the trend line is without making too big of a deal of it, it's growing, right? And we've now got 6.1% of the historians who agree strongly that the role of librarians is becoming much less important at my institution. And that, I think that connects, I think, to all of this business about the gateway, assistance, discovering materials. I think that there's a pretty clear follow through in terms of how roles are shifting and values are shifting. But here's let me tell the flip side of that, which is that dependence on the library is not declining. So if you look at 2003, 2006, 2009, and you look at both historians and humanists, and the same is true in the aggregate also, if anything, dependence on the library is kicking up a little bit, and it's grown to nearly 50% of historians report that they are very dependent on their library for research that they conduct. Now, not very dependent on a library, right? Not very dependent on some library that I use, but very dependent on my library. And so, we've speculated that maybe this has something to do with shifts in the funding environment, that, maybe that produces a greater sense of dependency. But this is an interesting and in some ways countervailing bit of evidence. So I guess this will be more findings than discussion, but there are, as you can see, there's increasing use of these the online and network level resources for discovery. The library is valued most uniformly for its purchasing role, and I guess I should just take a moment to say that, in many ways, one of the challenges for libraries is to turn the purchasing role into something that's more than just being a purchasing agent, right? It's how do you add value to that role, or is there a way to add value to that role? The perceived importance of the gateway role has declined significantly. We're not really sure what's going on with the teaching and research support roles. It's quite clear that while humanists value those roles more, they're not necessarily valued anywhere near as greatly as librarians think they should be. And then there's a small minority, but one that's apparently growing, that sees the librarian as less relevant than they have been in the past. And I think that the ultimate takeaway that I want to suggest here is that while historians and humanists are more express more value, more perceived value for the library, express more, if you like, affection for the library than, let's say, scientists do, the trajectory seems like it's fundamentally the same. And so that's a really challenging finding, I think, for all of us in thinking about, who is going to be doing the work that libraries do in the future, and is it how the trend lines don't feel like they work, and so that's I think the sort of dilemma that this leaves us with. So maybe less negatively, let me say, now I want to move on to the format transition for scholarly works, where we've seen just remarkable transformation in over the last 10 years. Here's journal current issues. This is another one of those strongly worded statements. If my library canceled the current issues of a print version of a journal but continued to make them available electronically, that would be fine with me. And again, we're measuring strong agreement with this statement, and you can see that it's today a majority of scientists, social scientists, humanists, and indeed historians agree strongly with that statement, and it's been growing pretty steadily over the past over the recent past, and every reason to think that that's going to continue to grow, and I think every reason to think that libraries are very much listening to you all, listening to faculty members, and canceling print versions when they feel they have a viable digital version available to them. Now, for the first time this year, in 2009, I should say, we gave a slightly different statement because if all libraries end up canceling print versions, then we wondered, well, will publishers continue to issue? If libraries cancel print versions, will publishers continue to issue print versions? And so this strongly worded statement said, I'm completely comfortable with journals I use regularly ceasing their print versions and publishing in electronic-only form. And you can see that hardly anyone, the 8, 9s, and 10s are represented by that blue bar. Hardly, only a quarter or so of humanists, and even slightly less than that of historians, agree strongly with that statement. And the strongly disagrees are pretty high among historians and humanists. Among scientists, more than 50% of scientists say that's fine. Just stop publishing the print. No problem for me. And so this is a case where there's really a notable a difference, and we don't have any trend line data here. So we'll look forward to tracking over the course of time, what emerges. So now moving on to journal backfile collections. We've asked a series of statements over the course of time. Here's one. Assuming that electronic collections of journals are proven to work well and are readily accessible, I would be happy to see hard copy collections discarded and replaced entirely by electronic collections. And so you can see I'm emphasizing this is a very, very strongly worded statement, and that's the intent, is to see not just who's sort of willing to accept the fact that journal backfiles might be withdrawn, but who's actually enthusiastic about it. And so you can see that somewhere around 45% or so of scientists and social scientists in 2009 are actually enthusiastic to withdraw journal backfile collections. Humanists and historians, it's only around 20% or so that are enthusiastic, but it's doubled for essentially all the groups just over the past 3 years, from 2006 to 2009. And that's really striking, and I have to say I don't really understand what's driven that shift, but that feels, it'll be interesting to see if it's going to continue to escalate at that kind of rate, but it certainly seems like there could be something fairly transformational going on there. So, with respect to journal current issues, what I think we saw was that in all disciplinary groupings, there's faculty respondents to our survey are comfortable with replacing print current issues with digital versions. There are a couple of key exceptions to that, and I want to really highlight art historians are not comfortable with that. I think that's because of image content. Asian studies faculty members are not comfortable with that. I could speculate that's because of the presence of non-Roman characters, perhaps. And so I think one of the dangers here is that there could be decisions made in the aggregate across all journals for all fields that don't sort of dig into who exactly needs what. So I think we're trying, while we're trying to show overall trends, we want to make sure we understand where there are exceptions. But the fact of the matter is that many journals, including some of the smaller humanities titles, including overseas titles, aren't. I mean, I'll just say, are not available electronically. Certainly not available through any kind of credible electronic platform. And I think that really complicates complicates dynamics here, and I do wonder what kind of pressure is going to come to bear on the titles that aren't yet available electronically, given the sort of desire that I think many libraries have to shift their workflows 100% from print to electronic for journals and other kinds of serials. Now, at the same time, as we saw, faculty members are definitely less comfortable with the idea of print no longer being issued. And I think that for some titles, that's fine. There may be individual subscriptions to the American Historical Review, let's say, where the individual subscriptions are such a high share of the total that it may not really be a factor. If people still want to receive their print, then they'll continue to do so. But it does make you wonder for the bulk of journals that are largely acquired only by libraries. If all libraries are canceling the print versions, then presumably publishers are going to cease issuing print versions. And I think understanding what's causing faculty members to have concerns there is something that I think there should be more sort of research done on. I don't think we understand whether there's some kind of functional issue here, whether there's some kind of reputational thing about wanting to be published in print, or whether it's more of a sentimental attachment to the print. And I think that's something that, depending on which of those it is or what combination of those it is, there might be different kinds of policy prescriptions that would emerge. Certainly it's the case that libraries, through some library research that we've done more recently, are much more willing to see publishers cease their print than faculty members are. And so I think there's some, an interesting divergence there between libraries trying to make, I guess, efficient decisions or forward-looking decisions, and faculty members to some significant degree not being entirely comfortable there. And I think that, the question about how libraries, how societies that are publishers, how other kinds of publishers should respond to this dynamic is one that remains a little bit unclear. And then on back files, the valuation of print journal collections is in really steady decline. That's something that's emerged from all sorts of different kinds of research that we've done. I mean, we've got now about 45%, wasn't it, of scientists that are actually enthusiastic about discarding print back files, and that is really and very few who are strongly against it, and that's really shaping the way that libraries are thinking about their journal collections. So I think it's an interesting question how historians, how humanists will react as some of these collections management decisions that libraries are starting to take are increasingly going to impact humanistic journal collections, for no doubt in my mind about that. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that develops over time. Now, as academic libraries are taking those actions, I think one of the projects that we work on extensively with libraries is whether there are ways to do this, to manage this transition in a way that works well for faculty members, that sees actually more resources become available to faculty members, that recognizes that preservation of print and access to print may not happen at a local level, but might happen on a sort of cross-institutional basis. These are questions that we don't really understand what the faculty comfort level and willingness to see new approaches to collections management might look like. But the funding picture is such that libraries are feeling they will not be able to, largely not be able to expand space. And if they can't expand their space, they're either going to be faced with purchasing less print or managing their print in different and more creative ways if they want to continue purchasing print collections. And so I think that where there's an emergent need, I think, for a real dialogue about the role of print collections, which are to a significant degree are humanistic collections in many of the major research libraries. And so the question about how those collections get managed and how they continue to be developed for scholars, I think, is quite pressing.